What is up, everybody? Sinestra here, and today we are taking a look at Darkheart Thicket. Yet again, we are doing these dungeon guides on Heroic, just so you can get a general overview of how the dungeon and the trash works, so you are ready to progress forwards to Mythic Plus. So, Darkheart Thicket. It's a dungeon within the Val'sharah zone and is very tentatively tied to the Emerald Nightmare. In fact, the scenes you're seeing here are very similar to the first raid that we will be doing, the Emerald Nightmare. The trash coming up to the first boss is there's a potential to do very heavy multipulls, so just make sure that you're very careful when you're walking through and try not to overpull, because otherwise you're going to find yourself in a situation where it gets really sticky. You can see the route we're taking here, which avoids quite a lot of the sort of like inconsequential packs, so if you can try and follow that, you're in for a good time. Avoid the general AoE stuff that's on the floor, and then you'll be at Archdruid Glaidalis before you know it. So we're making our way down here. We're almost at the last trash here. This trash is pretty standard. Make sure you're stunning and silencing whatever you can, and just keeping out of AoE, but otherwise it goes down really quickly. Archdruid Glaidalis, the boss that's coming up, is a really easy encounter. He is a druid that shapeshifts into both cat and bear form, pretty much as a damage dealer and a healer. You just need to not be stood in front of him. If you're stood in front of him, then you're going to have a bad time. For tanks, you just need to make sure that you're positioning his ability Primal Rampage to not hit other players, but you can see we're coming up for the pull now on the old Archdruid. Shadow Priest wise, running your standard talents here, you're not going to find anything that's out of order, but it's not a hard encounter. In fact, out of the bosses in this is very much the easiest one. He goes down quite quickly as well. If you want to pop Lust on here, you should have it back by Xavius as well, because you're probably looking at, well, on Heroic at least, you're looking at a 10 to 12 minute runtime. So you can definitely get hold of a double Lust for this one. We didn't Lust, but I did pop all my trinkets because I knew I'd get them back anyway. But really, there's not much more I can say about this boss, to be pretty honest with you. He's very simple. You can see he does a pounce ability, which is going to do a little bit of damage, but healers just need to make sure they're topping you up, and then you're pretty much ready to go. The trash after this also has the potential for pretty heavy multiples, so just make sure you're keeping on top of as much as you can. Don't overpull, because you're going to have a bad time, because this stuff does do a lot of damage, and there's lots of AoE casting, which is better off avoided. You can see here we're pulling up the first pack now. We're very nearly done with all the dungeon guides now as well. We've got literally, as the time of recording this one, I just have Violet Hold left to do, so we're getting really close. But with this one here, yet again, just avoid the big swells on the floor, taking loads of damage. The mushrooms, I think they give you a buff. I'm not 100% sure. That's the only thing I don't really know about this instance. But just keep making your way forward through the dungeon, and you will find it a very easy ride. There is a treasure over here. You can not go through the house, you can go up and right, but just going through the house just makes it a little bit quicker. You can kill this last trash, get yourself a little bit of extra artifact power. Do be keeping your eye on the minimap when you're doing these dungeons, because rare mobs do spawn in dungeons that have the chance of dropping like reasonably nice loot. Plus there's the option for extra artifact power, which is always a bonus, because you need as much of that stuff as physically possible. But yeah, we are a couple of days away from the live Legion launch now, guys, and I can't tell you how excited I am. I'm really hoping that these guys have been useful to everybody, and we can get a good sort of start to the expansion with those first 3 weeks before raid starts. Hopefully everybody gets in really good gear. So we're coming up to the second boss now, Oakheart. This trash hits reasonably difficult. Hits reasonably hard, so just make sure that you're like using stuns, using silences, using cooldowns. But here we're coming up to Oakheart. Oakheart, yet again, is probably a reasonably easy boss. Don't be in front of him if you don't have to be, so tank facing them away from the group. He's going to spawn like thorn patches that you just need to move out of. If you do get stuck in a thorn patch, your other DPS need to nuke you out of it. He's also going to do a big old AoE knockback, so just make sure that you are not keeping yourself in range, especially if you're going to be playing something like Surrender, but I doubt you'd be playing Surrender on a boss like this. But, well, not on Heroic anyway, you may choose to do that on Mythic Plus. But just, like, if you want to pad the meters horribly, you can absolutely go ahead and dot up the thorn patches, because they do remain active. But there's not a lot to this boss as well. It's a pretty easy thing. It's going to be probably a bit more difficult when it gets some modifiers. Like if it starts spawning a load more ads or does a load of AoE splash damage, that's probably going to suck. But realistically, don't stand in front of him, and make sure that you are nuking down people if they get stuck in the thorn patches. So there we go, Oakheart's down, and then we're moving on towards the next boss, Dresaron, the dragon. Now this boss has the potential for a massive disaster. Trash leading up to it is a gauntlet, and as you can see when we get a bit closer, you'll start to see patches of eggs along the sides. These patches of eggs, when stood on or by a player or come into a proximity by a player, spawn a whelpling, very much like a Nixia back in the day. So what you need to do is ensure that you're avoiding as many eggs as on the way through the gauntlet, just so you don't have to kill too much. And then Dresaron is a dragon. He has dragon tactics, he has his tail whip, and he has a breath. He also does a large AoE pushback called Downdraft. When Downdraft is activated, you need to try not to hit eggs, because if you are starting to hit eggs, they are going to spawn a rubbish ton of whelps, and you are going to have a bad time. You can see here that the boss starts off very near to sort of like a clutch of eggs, so if you can just stand to the side of him quite close, and just so that you have the most room available for yourself to be pushed back, then that's the best way to deal with this. Back in early stages of alpha and beta, this boss did way more damage, and it is actually skippable. And sort of like, if you really want to, there's a way that you can go to the right of Oakheart that takes you over and down towards the path to the shade of Xavius. But obviously on Mythic Plus, you're going to have to be killing everything, so just make sure that you are comfortable doing this boss. But once you know how to deal with the knockback, then you're pretty much ready to go. You can see there he's casting his breath. As long as you're as a tank and marking him and moving him away from the raid, you're pretty much golden. And don't stand in the big falling dirt rain, because you don't want to be taking any unnecessary damage. But there you can see Dresaron's down, and now we're heading on to the Shade of Xavius. Shade of Xavius is an okay fight. He's not massively overcomplicated, but there are a couple of mechanics that you need to be very aware of, which we'll go over shortly. But moving on here, you move down into this giant tree root, and you just start killing up this trash. Yet again, there's nothing special about this trash. Just make sure not to overpull and stun and silence enemies as much as you can. Just avoid that tank damage, and the quicker you will end up going. The healer man, save the healer mana, stun the enemies up, make everybody else's life easier. But as you can see, we're moving forward through this trash at a pretty good pace. There's not much of it. This is the last pack coming up here. It's a reasonably large pack, but then if you've got AoE stuns, which we do, and you have silences, you're pretty much good to go. Now, the Shade of Xavius. There are a couple of things that you need to be aware of. The first ability that you need to be aware of is Induced Paranoia. If you get targeted by Induced Paranoia, you need to make sure you move away from other players, otherwise you will silence them. That is not good, so especially make sure that you're moving away from healers, and you're going to have a good time. There is also the flip reverse of this, which is Waking Nightmare. If you have Waking Nightmare, which you can see I have to here, I think I've got Paranoia, but I don't, you need to make sure that you are staying with people. There we go, I realise that I have the right debuff now, and then I'm staying with the healer so that we both can keep casting. So remember, Induced Paranoia, move away from people. Waking Nightmare, stay with a body. Other than that, he's going to do some random burst AoE spells, and he's also going to cast some sort of like more targeted AoE spells that you can see here. Yet again, I've got that same buff, so I move next to the healer to make sure I can keep casting. Stay out of the patches on the floor, and you're going to have a really good time killing Xavius. Not the hardest of things, but I think this has with sort of like damage buffs or with heavy modifiers might be a reasonable challenge. He also does an AoE fear that you can see there, so just make sure that you have dispersion active as a Shadow Priest so that you can just reduce taking any damage from the AoE pulses. But other than that, guys, that's been Darkheart Thicket. We have one left to do. I'll see you in Violet Hold. Thanks very much for watching. Bye bye.